My family told me I wasn't welcome anymore, and I thought that heartbreak would stay locked inside our private group chat. But when screenshots of their cruel messages ended up in my office inbox, forwarded by someone I never expected, I suddenly found myself at the center of an HR investigation that threatened not just my career, but also my sense of identity. This is the story of how the truth I'd been running from exploded in front of everyone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Claire Dawson, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the quiet one in my family, the one who didn't stir up trouble or pick sides. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio, with a father who worked in insurance, a mother who never really left the world of small-town church gossip, and two siblings who thrived on attention and competition. I learned early to shrink myself, to survive in silence, and to do whatever it took not to be the subject of my family's biting group texts. But silence is not protection forever. That night in early spring, I was sitting on my couch, half watching an old sitcom rerun and half scrolling through emails from work when my phone buzzed with the familiar notification, Dawson Family Chat. Normally, it was banal. Memes my brother Jacob thought were funny, passive-aggressive reminders from my mother, or sarcastic quips from my sister Lindsay. But when I clicked in, the screen was already lit up with 20 new messages, and my heart sank before I'd even read a word. It started with Jacob. "So, Claire thinks she's better than us again, huh?" Then Lindsay. "Not surprised. She's always been too good for this family." And then my mother chimed in, not to calm things down, but to add fuel. "Claire doesn't understand loyalty. She makes choices like a stranger, not family." I stared at the words, frozen, each one piling on top of the other, until Jacob's final message cut through me like glass. "You're not welcome anymore." I didn't know what to say. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my breath shallow. For years, I'd brushed off their digs, excusing them as stress, misunderstanding, or the twisted way families sometimes show love. But this was different. This wasn't an inside joke or a half-hearted jab. This was exile, typed out in black and white and broadcast to the one place I could never escape, our family group chat. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I set the phone down and tried to breathe, but my chest ached with a pressure that felt like it might crush me. It wasn't just their rejection. It was the fact that I believed them. I wasn't welcome. I'd never been. My life had been shaped around the sharp edges of their criticism, and somehow, in my 32 years, I'd never questioned the truth of their words. Until that night, staring at that glowing screen, I realized just how far outside the circle I really was. The next morning, I dragged myself into work at Havenbrook Marketing, a mid-size agency where I'd been grinding for 6 years to build some semblance of stability. I liked my job, loved it even, because it was the one place where I wasn't defined by family gossip or the expectations I could never meet. At work, I was Claire Dawson, account manager, problem solver, dependable teammate. Nobody there knew the version of me that flinched every time my phone buzzed. But that illusion shattered when I opened my email around 10 a.m. and saw the subject line, FWD, Your Family Chat. My blood ran cold. The sender was listed as anonymous, but the message itself contained screenshots, full color, time-stamped captures of every word my family had flung at me the night before. Not just the cruel words, but even my silence, preserved like a damning piece of evidence. Attached was a note. "Thought HR should see this. Loyalty matters." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the mouse. Someone in my workplace had these screenshots. Someone thought they were worth showing to HR. And suddenly the words I tried to bury in private became a public weapon, sharpened against me. I stumbled into the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and tried to steady my breathing. My reflection in the mirror afterwards was pale, hollow-eyed, almost unrecognizable. It was like the world had shifted beneath me, exposing cracks I'd been too afraid to see. Who would do this? How did they even get access to my family chat? And what did loyalty mean in this context? Loyalty to my family, to my company, or to some twisted overlap? I went back to my desk, numb, forcing my hands to move on autopilot through client emails. But the questions circled, gnawed, refused to rest. My family had cast me out. My workplace now had evidence of it. And the one place I thought I was safe, where I could control how I was seen, was no longer secure. In that moment, I didn't yet know that the screenshots were just the beginning, that what looked like betrayal would open up a deeper web of lies, alliances, and hidden truths. All I knew was that I'd been marked, and there was no undoing it. For days after the email appeared, I lived in a fog. Every time I stepped into the office, I felt eyes on me, though no one said a word. Meetings blurred together, client calls felt distant, and even casual jokes at the coffee machine seemed barbed, as if everyone knew something I didn't. The screenshots had been sent, HR had them, and yet nothing had been addressed with me directly. That silence was worse than confrontation. It meant something was happening behind closed doors, in whispers and forwarded emails, and I was powerless to stop it. To understand why the email cut so deeply, though, you have to know my family. The Dawson family wasn't built on love or warmth. It was built on appearances. Growing up, we were the picture-perfect suburban family in Christmas cards and church bulletins. But behind the polished smiles was a relentless undercurrent of rivalry. My father, Richard, believed success was the only proof of worth, so he measured us against one another like stock prices. My mother, Carolyn, didn't fight him. She simply enforced the standards with her quiet manipulations, gossiping to neighbors and relatives in ways that kept us in line. Jacob, the eldest, inherited Dad's blunt ambition, while Lindsay perfected Mom's flair for social sabotage. I, the youngest, learned to adapt by disappearing into the background, making myself small enough not to draw fire. But when you grow up in a house where every word might be twisted, you learn to carry a private version of yourself. Mine was a quiet journal under my mattress and a long list of apologies I never owed. That coping mechanism, avoidance, silence, followed me into adulthood. I never confronted the barbs, never questioned the shifting alliances in our family chat. If Lindsay posted a photo mocking my haircut, I laughed along. If Jacob made a dig at my career, I brushed it off as brotherly teasing. If my mother accused me of forgetting my roots when I missed a church event, I texted back a heart emoji and told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. But beneath all those little concessions was exhaustion, the constant bending of my spine, until I couldn't tell where their judgment ended and my identity began. That was the hidden problem. Not the chat itself, not even the cruel words, but the years I'd spent letting them define me. The family group chat had always been the digital extension of our dinner table battles. What was once a tool for quick updates and holiday planning became a daily ritual of policing, teasing, and subtle put-downs. Jacob posted about his promotions, his bonus checks, his new car, while Dad chimed in with pride. Lindsay uploaded curated snapshots of her perfect home and perfect kids, while Mom added approving comments. My own updates, quiet photos from work events, recipes I tried, even just sharing a song I liked, were usually ignored, or worse, met with sarcastic emojis. There was never an outright rule that I didn't belong. It was death by 1,000 cuts, invisibility wrapped in constant comparison. The truth was, I had grown used to it. I told myself that's just how families are. I convinced myself that the dismissive silence was better than direct cruelty. But when those screenshots were leaked, the illusion cracked. What had always felt like a private wound was suddenly exposed as evidence of something real, undeniable, ugly.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe the screenshots weren't really from someone at work. Maybe it was some bizarre prank. But the more I thought about it, the less it mattered who hit send. What mattered was that the words existed, that they were written down in permanent form, and that now others had seen what I'd spent my life trying to minimize. My family's truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was out, and I couldn't take it back. That weekend, I avoided my phone altogether. I didn't respond to the dozens of new messages flooding the chat, questions about why I wasn't replying, jabs about me sulking again. Instead, I wandered the park near my apartment, watching families picnic, children playing tag, couples walking dogs, and wondering what it must feel like to have people who wanted you there. It was a strange mix of grief and envy. On one bench, I saw a young woman laughing as her father snapped a photo of her with an ice cream cone, and I felt a sharp ping of loss, not for what I had, but for what I'd never had. On Sunday, Lindsay left me a voicemail. I didn't answer, but I listened. Her voice was dripping with fake sweetness, but the words were cold steel. Claire, you need to stop playing the victim. If you're going to act like you don't need us, don't be surprised when we tell you not to come around. Actions have consequences. I deleted it, but couldn't delete the echo of her tone in my head. That phrase, actions have consequences, would come back to haunt me. At work Monday morning, the tension thickened. HR so hadn't called me in, but my manager, David, kept glancing at me with the cautious politeness of someone handling fragile glass. A teammate, who normally joked with me in meetings, was suddenly formal, her voice clipped. By noon, I realized the silence wasn't just my imagination. Someone had seen those messages, believed them, and now my reputation was shifting in ways I couldn't control. The hidden problem wasn't just my family's cruelty. It was how their words had followed me here, into the one sanctuary I thought I had left. And beneath it all was a question I couldn't shake. Had I been complicit in building this problem by never speaking up, by always swallowing my voice? For years, I thought silence kept me safe. But now, silence was destroying me. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the glow of my phone lighting up again with new family notifications, I realized something I'd never admitted out loud. My family's toxic cycle wasn't just about them. It was about me. My survival strategy, silence, had been both my shield and my cage, and the walls were closing in. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon, though the storm had been building long before. It started with a calendar invite, an unexpected 30-minute slot titled Check In with HR that appeared in my inbox just before lunch. My stomach twisted when I saw it. I tried to tell myself it was routine, maybe just a quarterly touch base, but the moment I walked into the HR director's office, I knew it wasn't routine at all. Her name was Melissa Grant, a woman in her 40s with a calm, deliberate way of speaking. She gestured for me to sit across from her, her desk clear except for a neat stack of papers and a closed laptop. The blinds were drawn and the air felt heavy with expectation. "Claire," she began, her voice measured, "thank you for meeting with me. I wanted to talk to you about some material that was brought to our attention." My throat tightened. She didn't have to specify. I knew instantly. Melissa slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside, printed in sharp black and white, were the screenshots. The chat, my family's words, my silence, all laid out on office paper like evidence in a trial. I stared at them, unable to look away, as if seeing them on paper made them more real than on a glowing screen. She folded her hands and waited. "Do you want to explain what this is?" Heat flooded my face. My instinct was to defend, to clarify, to explain that this was private, that it had nothing to do with work, but the words stuck. My voice, always so quick to apologize, faltered. "That's, my family," I said, my voice barely high enough to be heard. "It's a group chat. They were upset with me." Melissa nodded slowly, as though she expected that answer but wanted more. "The concern," she said, "is that there are references in these messages that could raise questions about your loyalty to the company. The note attached to the screenshot suggested that your family believes you're disloyal." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We take issues of trust and workplace culture seriously, Claire. I want to give you the opportunity to explain this in your own words before we determine any next steps."
It was absurd, absolutely absurd. My family's bitter accusations, their twisted narratives, now risked bleeding into my professional life. But what was worse was the realization that I couldn't laugh it off anymore.
My silence wasn't protecting me. It had followed me here, and now it threatened to undo everything I'd worked for. I told Melissa the truth, or at least part of it, that my family had a history of saying cruel things, that they often exaggerated, that I had no idea how the messages got here, and that I was as shocked as she was. She listened, scribbling notes, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she gave a small nod. "Thank you for being honest. For now, I'd like you to forward me the original chat messages from your device so we can verify authenticity. Then we'll discuss whether any further action is needed." The idea of forwarding her those messages made my stomach churn. To open my phone, to expose the raw wound of those words to someone else, it felt like stripping off my skin. But I had no choice. I nodded, numb, and she dismissed me with the promise of a follow-up meeting. Back at my desk, I sat motionless for nearly an hour. My inbox pinged, my phone buzzed, but I couldn't move. The walls of silence I'd built were crumbling, and the reality I had tried to contain was spilling into every corner of my life. I thought of Lindsay's voicemail, Jacob's cutting words, my mother's endless judgment, and for the first time I saw them not just as family quirks, but as weapons. Weapons that had been aimed at me for years, and now someone had picked them up and fired them in a different battlefield. That evening, as I sat in my car in the office parking lot, the tears finally came. It wasn't just the humiliation of HR seeing my family's cruelty. It was the knowledge that I couldn't undo any of it. I couldn't retreat into silence anymore. The old way, avoiding, minimizing, excusing, wasn't going to save me. Not when the evidence lived in folders on Melissa Grant's desk. Not when colleagues might already be whispering about what they'd seen. The breaking point wasn't just that HR had the screenshots. It was that I realized I had no safe place left. Home was poisoned, and now work was too. If silence wasn't protection, then what was left? That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called my friend Emily. She wasn't part of my family circle, hadn't even met most of them, but she had been my college roommate and one of the few people who knew pieces of my history. My voice cracked as I told her what happened, and there was a long silence on the other end before she said, "Claire, this isn't normal. What they're doing, what's happening to you, it's not okay. You can't keep letting them do this." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not okay. I had spent my whole life normalizing, rationalizing, bending myself to fit their cruelty. But hearing someone outside the circle name it for what it was like light breaking into a dark room. Still, light can be painful when you've been in the dark too long. I wasn't ready to embrace it fully, but I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the old way was gone. The next morning, I forwarded the chat logs to Melissa, as requested, my hands shaking with every tap. When I hit send, it felt like I'd crossed an invisible line. For years, the truth had been buried, hidden under layers of excuses and silence. Now it was out in the open, undeniable, and I couldn't hide behind my old defenses anymore. That was the breaking point. Not just the HR meeting, not just the evidence, but the shift inside me. The realization that my silence had turned into complicity. And now, whether I wanted to or not, I had to face the truth. The following week, the walls closed in further. It wasn't just HR anymore. I noticed the shift in how people at work treated me. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. The casual warmth that once defined our team began to erode. David, my manager, called me into his office under the guise of reviewing a client proposal. But his questions veered off course. "Is everything okay at home, Claire? I've noticed you seem distracted, and, well, there are some things going around." My pulse quickened. I tried to smile, tried to pass it off as stress, but his eyes lingered on me with the kind of suspicion that made it clear he knew more than he was saying. Outside eyes were seeing what I had worked so hard to hide. In the break room, a conversation hushed the moment I walked in. A colleague who had always invited me to lunch suddenly left me off the calendar. Even the receptionist who once greeted me with cheerful small talk gave me a polite but cool nod. The screenshots had done their work, The words my family hurled at me in anger had been twisted into evidence of something darker, something people could use to question my integrity. I wanted to scream that none of it was true, that my family's words had nothing to do with who I was at work. But the truth was murky. I had no way to prove intent, and the messages looked damning without context.
The cover-up, my lifelong habit of silence and minimization, was failing. There was no way to pretend this wasn't happening. For the first time in my life, people outside the Dawson family circle were glimpsing the dysfunction. And the worst part was, they didn't see it as dysfunction, they saw it as proof that maybe I wasn't who I claimed to be. Melissa called me back into her office on Thursday. She had her laptop open this time, and the manila folder was gone, replaced by a digital file on her screen. "We've reviewed the screenshots you provided," she said, "and I want you to know we've taken steps to verify their source. It appears they were forwarded from an account associated with one of your colleagues." My breath caught. A colleague? Someone I worked with had access to my family chat? That meant someone had been watching me, maybe even lurking for months, waiting for the right moment. I wanted to ask who, but Melissa raised a hand. "I can't disclose names yet," she continued, "but I need you to be prepared. This may escalate into a formal inquiry." A formal inquiry? The words rattled in my brain like stones. This wasn't just a private embarrassment anymore. It was official, logged, documented. The company was treating my family's toxicity as evidence in a workplace matter. And that meant outsiders were stepping into a story they couldn't possibly understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every interaction at work, wondering who among my colleagues could have done it. Was it Samantha, the teammate who always seemed eager to prove herself? Or maybe Ethan, who had access to shared drives and was notoriously nosy? The paranoia gnawed at me. Every smile seemed false, every casual comment loaded. My family's cruelty was no longer contained. It had infected every corner of my life, and now I had no control over how it spread. The next morning, as I walked into the building, I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. Two coworkers were huddled together in the hallway, their phones angled toward each other, whispering. When they saw me, they froze, then quickly walked away. I didn't need to ask what they were looking at. I knew. The screenshots were circulating, maybe not officially, but enough to poison the atmosphere. I wanted to disappear, to crawl back into the shell I'd always used as protection. But the shell was cracked, and nothing I did could patch it anymore. The outside eyes weren't going to look away. And the more they saw, the more I realized how fragile my constructed identity had been. At work, I had always been Claire, the dependable, Claire, the quiet achiever. Now I was Claire the problem, Claire the subject of gossip, Claire the one under investigation. On Saturday, I made the mistake of opening the family group chat again. I hadn't responded since the blow-up, but curiosity got the better of me. There, in plain view, was a new thread of messages. "Lindsay, guess your little work family knows the truth now." Jacob, "Told you, Claire, you think you can hide forever, but you can't." My mother chimed in with her usual cruelty masked as concern. "This is what happens when you forget where you came from. Maybe this will be a lesson for you." I dropped the phone as if it burned me. The realization hit with brutal clarity. They weren't just passive participants in this league, they were complicit. Someone in my family had sent those screenshots to my workplace. Someone I shared blood with had crossed that line. And now outsiders weren't just suspicious, they had ammunition. For the first time in my life, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal not as a private wound, but as a public humiliation. The eyes that once skimmed past me now lingered, dissected, judged. And the truth I'd tried to bury was rising, unstoppable. I didn't know it then, but this was the first turning point, the moment when the lies, the silences, the cover-ups could no longer hold. Because once outside eyes see the truth, no matter how distorted, there's no going back. The Monday after those hallway whispers, the pressure sharpened into something I could no longer ignore. I arrived at work to find an email from Melissa waiting in my inbox. Please prepare to provide any documentation or context that you believe would help clarify the situation regarding the group chat. We will be speaking with additional parties this week. My stomach lurched as I reread the message. Documentation. Context. In other words, evidence. HR was treating this like a case, not a misunderstanding. And that meant they were collecting every scrap of proof they could find. For years, I had lived by the rule that what happened in my family stayed in my family. It was a kind of unspoken pact enforced by fear. Speak up and you're disloyal. Question the narrative and you're punished. But now, silence was no longer an option. If I didn't explain myself, the only story anyone would hear was the one written by Jacob, Lindsay, and my mother in their venomous texts.
That night, I opened the group chat again, not to reply, but to scroll back. My thumb moved through months of messages, then years. Each line was a small cut, an insult, a manipulation I had swallowed whole. There were digs at my career. Still at that little company? Thought you'd aim higher, Claire. There were jabs at my personal life. No husband, no kids. What exactly are you doing with yourself? And there were the endless comparisons. Jacob's successes and Lindsay's curated perfection held up like measuring sticks against which I always fell short. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 2 in the morning, screenshotting everything, compiling a folder I wasn't sure I had the courage to send. My hands shook as I read messages I had forced myself to forget, the small humiliations that had accumulated like rust over time. It wasn't just the words, it was the patterns. The way my mother always sided with Jacob, the way Lindsay undermined me with backhanded compliments, the way any attempt to assert myself was twisted into selfishness or disloyalty. Looking at it laid out in front of me was like staring at a map of my own erasure. But gathering the evidence came with a cost. Each screenshot was a reminder of my complicity, of the times I let it go, laughed it off, or responded with a smiley face instead of outrage. And now, as I compiled the record, a 9 question took root. Would anyone at work understand? Or would they see this not as proof of abuse, but as confirmation that I was broken, unfit, too messy to belong here? By Wednesday, Melissa called me in again. This time, I brought the folder. She listened quietly as I explained the history, her expression professional, but not unkind. She asked careful questions. Would you say this is a pattern? How long has this been going on? Have you ever felt threatened by them? I answered as best I could, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry the truth I'd buried. She nodded, taking notes, then said something that startled me. Claire, you need to understand. We're not just looking at this as an HR issue. We're looking at this as a matter of workplace safety and integrity. If your family is interfering here, that crosses a line. Safety. The word rattled in my head. I had never thought of myself as unsafe. Humiliated, diminished, excluded, yes, but unsafe? And yet, as I walked back to my desk, I realized she was right. My family had breached the last boundary I thought I had. They had brought their cruelty into my workplace, into the one arena I had tried to protect. That wasn't just mean-spirited. That was invasive. Meanwhile, the tension with my colleagues grew heavier. Samantha asked me, casually but with a sharp edge, if everything was okay at home. Ethan cracked a joke about family drama going corporate. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough. And with each glance, each whisper, I felt the net tightening. The evidence wasn't just being gathered by me, it was being gathered against me. In the gossip mill, in the way people interpreted my every move. That Friday, I received a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold.
It was another screenshot, but this time it wasn't from my phone. It was from someone else's perspective with my name highlighted in blue. The message was from Jacob. She'll crack eventually. She always does. Underneath, the unknown sender had typed out, "You should know what they're saying about you." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Someone on the inside was feeding me evidence too. But who and why? Were they trying to help me, or was this another layer of manipulation? The questions piled up, but the effect was the same. The truth was bleeding into places I couldn't control, and the weight of it was crushing me. That night, I sat in bed with my laptop open, the folder of screenshots staring back at me. Evidence on one side, my silence on the other. For the first time, I began to realize this wasn't just about proving myself innocent at work. This was about breaking a cycle that had defined me my whole life. But breaking it meant exposure. It meant risk. It meant stepping into the storm instead of hiding from it. And deep down, I knew the storm was only beginning. The undeniable proof came on a gray Tuesday morning when the air outside was thick with drizzle and the office felt hushed, like everyone was waiting for a storm. Melissa summoned me again, but this time she wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was David, my manager. His arms crossed, his jaw set. The atmosphere was heavier than before, and my chest tightened as I took the chair across from them. Melissa spoke first, her tone steady but firm. She said, "Claire, we've received additional information that you need to see." She turned her laptop toward me, and my heart stopped. On the screen were not just screenshots of my family's cruel words, but also email headers, metadata, and confirmation of the sender's identity. The leak had come directly from Lindsay's email account. My sister had forwarded the group chat to one of my colleagues, Samantha, and the two of them had exchanged notes about me, dissecting my character like a science project. The evidence was irrefutable. The email trails showed Lindsay mocking me to Samantha. She's always been dramatic. Maybe if her work family sees who she really is, they'll stop thinking she's so perfect. And Samantha had replied, "This is useful. Thanks for sharing. People here should know." I felt my entire body go cold, my hands gripping the chair as though I might fall without it. It was one thing to suspect betrayal. It was another to see it spelled out in timestamps and IP addresses. Undeniable, merciless. David broke the silence. "Claire, this is serious. We need to understand how deep this goes. It's clear your personal life is being weaponized in our workplace, and it's affecting not only you, but the integrity of our team." His words rang in my ears, each syllable driving home the reality I had avoided for too long. My family's cruelty was no longer a private torment. It had metastasized, spreading into the one world I had tried so hard to keep safe. Melissa leaned forward. "We'll be launching a formal investigation into Samantha's conduct, but I need to ask you directly, do you feel your family is deliberately trying to sabotage you? Because that's the implication here." The question struck me like a blow. Sabotage. I had never allowed myself to frame it that way. I told myself they were just difficult, just harsh, just family. But sabotage was the truth. Lindsay hadn't leaked those messages out of carelessness. She had done it with intent, with calculation, with the specific goal of tearing me down. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes," I whispered, "they want me to fail." Saying it out loud was like unlocking a door I'd never dared open. Once spoken, it couldn't be unsaid. Melissa's expression softened slightly, but her professionalism never wavered. "Thank you for your honesty. This changes things." When the meeting ended, I stumbled out into the corridor, my vision swimming. The undeniable proof was now documented in company files, backed by metadata and email trails. There was no denying what had been done to me. But with that clarity came a crushing weight. Because if Lindsay and Samantha could collude against me, what else had been whispered, shared, twisted behind my back? I left the office early, wandering aimlessly through the drizzle. The city felt alien, the sidewalks too sharp, the buildings too tall. I ducked into a cafe and sat staring at my untouched coffee, my phone buzzing relentlessly with new family messages I couldn't bring myself to read. They must have known by now. If HR had proof, Lindsay surely knew her role was exposed. But instead of panic, I felt a strange calm creeping in. For the first time, I wasn't doubting myself. The truth wasn't just in my head. It wasn't just my word against theirs. It was real, undeniable, documented. That night, I opened the group chat again, bracing myself. The messages were exactly what I expected. Jacob ranting about betrayal, Lindsay defensive but still venomous, my mother weaving guilt into every line. You didn't have to take it this far, Claire. Families fight. You air dirty laundry and it will come back on you. For once, I didn't feel the usual wave of shame. Instead, I felt clarity. They weren't just angry at me, they were terrified because their lies had crumbled and the world outside could finally see what they were. I took a screenshot of my mother's message and added it to the growing folder, not because HR needed it, but because I did. A record. Proof that I wasn't imagining the cycle. For the first time, the scales tipped. The evidence was no longer their weapon alone. It was mine too. Over the next few days, the investigation at work gained momentum. Samantha stopped coming into the office, her absence explained only by a vague note about personal leave. Melissa assured me I would be updated, but I could sense the shift already. Colleagues who had avoided me were now cautiously warm again, offering coffee runs and small talk as if to test the waters. They knew that tide had turned. The undeniable proof had exposed not just Lindsay's betrayal, but also Samantha's collusion. The whispers weren't about me anymore. They were about them. And yet, beneath the vindication, a hollowness grew. Because as much as the evidence freed me from doubt, it also bound me to a truth I couldn't escape. My own sister had chosen to destroy me. That realization was heavier than any workplace gossip. It was a fracture that could never be mended. One evening, Emily came over, armed with takeout and quiet comfort. I showed her the emails, the proof. She read them in silence, her brow furrowed, then looked at me with fierce compassion. Claire, this is not just about your job anymore. This is about you reclaiming your life. They've controlled your story for too long. Now you have the receipts. Use them. Her words planted a seed. For years, I had been at the mercy of their narrative. Now, for the first time, I had evidence that couldn't be twisted or denied. And that meant I had power I never held before. The revelation was undeniable. The lies were shattered. And the turning point was clear. From this moment on, there was no hiding. The truth was out, and I had to decide what to do with it.
The days after the revelation blurred together, a fog of exhaustion mixed with grim determination. I went through the motions at work, answering emails, joining meetings, forcing myself to contribute. But underneath it all, there was a quiet storm brewing inside me. The undeniable proof had shifted everything. I could no longer cling to the fragile illusion that my family was just misunderstood or overly harsh. No, they had actively chosen to humiliate me, to weaponize private conversations, to conspire with a colleague who delighted in tearing me down. And the worst part was the silence that followed. My family didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the pain they'd caused. They simply doubled down, pressing guilt into every message, making me the villain for not keeping things in the family. It was one particular night, staring at my glowing phone in the dark, that the decision crystallized. The group chat had exploded again, filled with messages that twisted the truth so grotesquely it made my stomach churn. Lindsay wrote, "You're exaggerating everything. Samantha was just joking around. You're ruining her career over nothing." My mother added, "Claire, if you cared about this family, you'd stop dragging us into your workplace. Nobody outside needs to know what we say to each other." And then Jacob, always blunt, "If you had any self-respect, you'd quit your job before they fire you. You've embarrassed all of us enough." In the dim light, my tears dried faster than they came. Their words no longer shattered me the way they used to. They only rang hollow, stripped of the power they once had. Because for the first time, I knew the truth wasn't subjective. It wasn't my word against theirs. It was written, recorded, documented, undeniable. And that meant I had a choice to make. Stay silent, continue absorbing their venom, or finally, unequivocally, speak. The thought terrified me. Speaking up meant exposing them completely, leaving no room for reconciliation or retreat. It meant accepting that once I stepped into the light, there was no going back to the shadows of quiet suffering. I would be severing ties, maybe forever. But as I lay there with my phone buzzing in my hand, the answer came with a clarity that surprised me. Silence had never protected me. It had only given them more space to wound me, and I was done bleeding in the dark. The next morning, I asked Melissa for another meeting. Her office was becoming a second home to me, a place where the air was clearer and the rules were simple. Truth mattered here. I sat across from her and David, my voice steady in a way that it hadn't been before. I want to make a formal statement, I said. I want my side of this documented in full. I won't protect them anymore. Melissa leaned back, studying me with a seriousness that told me she understood the gravity of what I was doing. Claire, are you certain? Once we escalate this, it can't be walked back. It may involve legal proceedings, formal complaints, even external authorities if harassment is proven. I nodded. I know, and I'm ready. David added quietly, this will put you at odds not just with Samantha, but with your family. It will change things forever. For the briefest moment, a flicker of grief passed through me, mourning the family I had always wished for but never had. And then I exhaled, steady. They already made that choice when they betrayed me. This is me choosing myself. So I spoke. For 2 hours, I recounted everything. Not just the recent leaks, but years of corrosive comments, the constant belittling, the ways they chipped away at my confidence until I questioned my own worth. I told Melissa about the isolation, the gaslighting, the way my achievements were always diminished while my mistakes were magnified. I showed her the screenshots, the email trail, the late-night messages filled with venom disguised as family talk. Melissa typed diligently, nodding occasionally, never interrupting. It was the longest I had ever spoken about the truth of my family. By the end, my voice shook, but my spine felt straighter than it had in years. When I finished, the room was quiet. Melissa closed her laptop gently and met my gaze. Thank you, Claire. This is incredibly brave. We'll ensure your statement is protected and used appropriately. You've done the right thing. The words sank into me slowly, like sunlight through cracks in a long-sealed room. Brave. Right thing. No one had ever said those words to me about my family before. For years, I had been the problem, the sensitive one, the overreactor. But now, here, my voice carried weight. My truth was not only heard, but validated. That evening, I called Emily. She came over within an hour, listening as I explained everything I had done. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You've crossed the bridge now, Claire. There's no going back. But that's a good thing. You don't need to live under their thumb anymore." Her words echoed the truth I already felt deep inside. I had made my choice. The secret was no longer mine to protect, and the cost of silence was one I would never pay again. I knew the backlash would come. I knew the storm was only just beginning. But for once, I wasn't afraid of the storm, because speaking had given me something silence never did. Freedom.
The storm I had anticipated came faster than I thought, and it came with teeth. It began with Samantha, of course. 2 days after I gave my statement to HR, she cornered me in the hallway outside the conference rooms. Her heels clicked like warning shots against the tile, and before I could step into the safety of an open door, she was in front of me, her voice low and venomous. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed, eyes narrowed. "Running to HR with your sob story, dragging your family into this. Do you have any idea what you've started?" I stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding. But then something inside me shifted. Normally, I would have shrunk, avoided eye contact, tried to diffuse her anger. But I wasn't the same Claire anymore.
not after speaking my truth. I met her glare and said evenly, "I didn't start this, Samantha. You did when you crossed a line. And now you're going to answer for it." The words seemed to stun her for a moment, as if she hadn't expected me to push back. Her lips curled into a smirk, but there was tension in her eyes. "HR won't save you. They don't care about your whining. People like you don't survive in this company. You'll see." She spun on her heel and stalked off, but the confrontation left me shaking. I ducked into the restroom, gripping the edge of the sink as I tried to steady my breathing. This was only the beginning. By the next morning, the group chat was ablaze again. My family had clearly been in contact with her because the messages were coordinated, sharper, almost rehearsed. Lindsay wrote, "Can't believe you would stab your own sister in the back like this. Do you want her life ruined? Do you want everyone to know how selfish you are?" My mother followed quickly. "HR doesn't care about family drama, Claire. You're dragging our name through the mud, and for what? Petty grudges? You're destroying Samantha's reputation and ours in the process. Shame on you." And Jacob, predictably, "You've gone too far this time. You want to burn bridges? Fine. Just don't expect us to pick up the pieces when you're left with nothing." The mounting pressure was unbearable, but unlike before, I didn't crumble. I saved the messages, cataloged them with the rest of my evidence, and sent them to Melissa. She replied within minutes, "Thank you for forwarding these, Claire. We'll add them to the record. Stay strong. You're not alone in this." That last sentence became my lifeline. I repeated it to myself when the threats grew louder, when the accusations cut deeper, when my family's voice in my ear made me feel like a traitor. But the true confrontation came that Friday afternoon. Melissa called me into a conference room where she and David were already seated. Samantha was there too, her arms crossed, radiating indignation. The moment I walked in, I felt the air tighten, heavy with unspoken hostility. Melissa gestured for me to sit. She said, "We're here to address the complaints and counterclaims. Both of you will have a chance to speak. This is a formal step in the investigation." Samantha launched into her defense. Immediately, "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Claire is exaggerating everything. She's always been dramatic, always looking for attention. She twisted our family group chat into some kind of conspiracy just to make herself look like a victim. She's ruining my career over nothing but lies." Her voice cracked at the edges, but her performance was polished, almost theatrical. She looked at Melissa and David as if daring them to believe her. When it was my turn, I kept my voice steady, though my hands trembled under the table. I didn't twist anything. I brought receipts. Every message I've shared is exactly as it was written. This isn't about family disagreements. This is about targeted humiliation, workplace sabotage, and retaliation. Samantha didn't just insult me in private. She leaked private conversations into the office, into the hands of colleagues who weaponized them against me. That isn't just cruel, it's harassment. Melissa nodded. "We have reviewed the evidence Claire submitted, including screenshots, emails, and corroborating statements. The material is consistent and verifiable." Samantha's mask slipped for just a moment. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a snarl. "You're pathetic, Claire. You've always been jealous, always the outsider. You think HR will protect you? They'll see you for what you are, a weak little girl who couldn't handle some teasing." But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye and said evenly, "I'm not weak. I'm done letting you decide who I am." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw something flicker in Samantha's eyes. Not confidence, not anger, but fear. She knew the walls were closing in. Later that night, the group chat lit up once more, the messages more vicious than ever. My mother's words stung the most. "You've chosen your side. Don't come crying to us when they drop you too. You're not welcome here anymore." The finality of it was like a knife, but beneath the pain was a strange sense of liberation. They had finally said it outright. I was no longer welcome, and maybe, just maybe,
That was the beginning of my freedom.
The mounting pressure was suffocating, but it was also clarifying. I saw the truth with a sharpness I never had before. Samantha wasn't just my sister. She was my antagonist, the person who thrived on keeping me small, on using cruelty as control. And my family, whether out of fear, loyalty, or sheer cruelty, had chosen to stand beside her. The confrontation was no longer about salvaging relationships. It was about survival, about protecting myself, about reclaiming the dignity they had tried so hard to strip from me. And in that confrontation, I felt something powerful settle in my chest. The storm was here, yes, but I wasn't hiding anymore. The fallout was swift, merciless, and heavier than I could have imagined. After that confrontation in the conference room, I thought maybe things would quiet down while HR continued their investigation. I was wrong. It felt as though a switch had flipped, as though Samantha and my family had decided that if they couldn't control me with subtle manipulation, they would destroy me outright. The group chat grew darker, their messages now less about persuasion and more about condemnation. Jacob's words hit me like a hammer. Don't bother showing up for Thanksgiving. Don't bother calling Mom again. You've made your choice, so live with it. My mother chimed in hours later, more cold and cutting than ever before. You wanted to burn bridges, Claire. Well, they're gone. Don't expect forgiveness. I read those words over and over until they blurred together, the tears stinging my eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was exile. They had cast me out, and they wanted me to feel it. At work, the backlash took on a different form. Colleagues who had once smiled at me in the break room now avoided my eyes. Conversations hushed when I walked by. I heard whispers, ugly, dismissive comments that I knew had been fed by Samantha's version of events. Someone even slipped a note into my desk drawer, written in blocky handwriting. Snitches don't last here. I sat staring at it for nearly an hour, my stomach in knots, my pulse erratic. That was no longer just a family dispute bleeding into work. That was a threat. Melissa did what she could, checking in with me regularly, assuring me that the investigation was still ongoing, that my evidence was strong. But no matter how reassuring her words were, they couldn't erase the loneliness that seeped into my bones. My own family had rejected me. My coworkers looked at me like I was a pariah. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every message, every cruel word, every mocking laugh from Samantha. A part of me began to wonder, had I made a mistake? Was telling the truth worth all this pain? The lowest moment came one evening when I received a voicemail from my father. He rarely called, preferring to stay out of the family conflicts, but his voice was stern and tired. Claire, your mother's right. You've gone too far this time. You're embarrassing us all. I don't know why you're doing this, but you need to stop. If you keep going, don't bother coming home. Don't bother thinking you're still a part of this family. Hearing him say those words gutted me more than anything else. My father had always been the quiet one, the one I thought might secretly be on my side. But his message left no room for hope. I played it 3 times, hoping I'd misheard, but the words remained the same. Don't bother coming home. In the days that followed, I began to withdraw. I ate lunch alone, avoided checking my phone, and buried myself in work tasks that felt hollow and endless. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers, afraid of what new message might be waiting for me. The physical toll was undeniable, too. I barely slept. And when I did, I woke up sweating from nightmares where I was trapped in a group chat that scrolled endlessly with insults, my family's faces flickering across the screen, laughing at my pain. My body felt heavy, my spirit brittle. And yet, even in the midst of this darkness, there was a part of me that clung to a fragile thread of resilience. One afternoon, after nearly breaking down in the restroom again, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my hair limp, but there was something else there too. Defiance. They wanted me broken, wanted me to regret ever speaking up. But wasn't that proof that I had done the right thing? If my words hadn't mattered,
If my truth hadn't struck a nerve, would they be fighting so hard to silence me? Still, the doubt returned in waves. Every time another cruel message arrived, like Lindsay writing, "You'll regret this, Claire. You've lost us for good," I felt the knife twist deeper. Every time a coworker gave me that sideways glance, I felt more isolated. The weight of retaliation and backlash was suffocating, and I often found myself on the edge of tears at random moments, walking to my car, sitting at my desk, folding laundry at home. The simplest tasks became reminders of how fractured my world had become.
One night, unable to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I scrolled through the screenshots, the emails, the saved voicemails. Each piece of evidence was a fragment of the truth I had fought to protect. But as I stared at them, I wondered if it was worth it. Would anyone believe me in the end? Or would I be left alone, familyless, friendless, jobless, with nothing but a pile of digital files that no one wanted to see? The darkness of that thought nearly swallowed me whole. And then I remembered Melissa's words, "You're not alone." I clung to that, whispering it like a mantra, because even though I felt abandoned, even though I felt stripped bare, there was a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth would outlast the lies. The cost was higher than I had ever expected, and I was drowning in the consequences. But somewhere deep inside, I believed that this couldn't be the end of my story. It was the darkest chapter yet, the night before the dawn. But if there was one thing I had learned in this journey, it was that truth has a way of surviving, even when everything else falls apart. The day of the formal HR hearing arrived, and I felt as though every nerve in my body had been electrified. I sat in a stark conference room with white walls and a long oak table, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to keep them from shaking. On one side sat Melissa, calm and poised with her notepad and folders neatly arranged. Across from us was Samantha, flanked by her own manager and an HR representative who looked like she had already picked her side. The atmosphere was thick, charged, and suffocating, as if the entire office was holding its breath. This was it, the moment where everything I had endured would either crumble or be validated. Samantha spoke first, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness that didn't fool me anymore. "I think we're all here because Claire has misunderstood a few things and unfortunately escalated them beyond reason," she said, flashing her most innocent smile. She glanced at me briefly, as though daring me to flinch, before continuing. "Our family dynamics are complicated, but they don't belong here in the workplace. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm confident that will become clear today." Melissa leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Actually, we're here because the evidence suggests otherwise," she said, her voice sharp but professional. She opened a folder and slid several sheets across the table. "These are screenshots from the family group chat, including multiple instances of harassment, threats, and attempts to discredit Claire within this workplace. You'll see timestamps and context that directly tie into conversations and behaviors observed here at the office." The HR representative adjusted her glasses, scanning the first few pages. Samantha stiffened, her carefully composed mask beginning to crack. "This is taken completely out of context. Families fight all the time. Claire is exaggerating because she's always been the black sheep. She's using this office as her stage to play the victim." I wanted to shrink into myself, but I forced my voice to rise, trembling but resolute. "This isn't exaggeration. These messages," I pointed to the papers Melissa had handed over, "aren't just about family disagreements. They're about intimidation, exclusion, and retaliation that has directly affected my work. Samantha has used our family ties to isolate me here, to humiliate me, and to threaten me. This isn't about a private spat. It's about abuse spilling into a professional environment where I deserve safety." There was silence, thick and uncomfortable, as everyone absorbed my words. My heart was racing, but for the first time, I felt the power of my truth filling the room. Melissa spoke again, her tone unwavering. We also have corroborating evidence from emails, voice memos, and even a note left in Claire's desk drawer. All of these demonstrate a clear pattern of harassment and retaliation. This is not an isolated incident. This is systemic, deliberate, and damaging. Samantha's face turned red, her veneer finally slipping. This is ridiculous. Claire has always been overly sensitive, always twisting everything to make herself look good. Do you know what she's done to our family? She's torn us apart with her lies. She's turned people against us, and now she wants to destroy my career too? Her voice cracked at the end, the fury in her eyes unmistakable. But this time her words didn't carry the weight they once had. The HR representative looked back at the evidence, her lips tightening. Samantha, regardless of family disputes, these messages are highly inappropriate and directly related to this workplace environment. Using private family communication to threaten or retaliate against a coworker is a serious violation. For the first time, I saw Samantha falter. Her eyes darted at me, wide and desperate, as though silently begging me to back down. But I didn't. I met her gaze and held it, steady and unyielding, as if to say, "You can't silence me anymore."
The rest of the hearing continued with more evidence laid out in meticulous detail. Melissa presented every screenshot, every voicemail transcript, every time-stamped note with calm precision. Each piece of proof stripped away another layer of Samantha's defense until she was left cornered, scrambling for excuses that no longer held weight. Her allies shifted uncomfortably, their confidence in her waning as the truth became undeniable. By the end, the room felt transformed. The tension was still there, but it was different. No longer suffocating, but charged with the sense that something irreversible had happened. The truth had been spoken, recorded, and could no longer be buried. When the HR representative finally said, "We will be reviewing this formally and taking appropriate action," I felt a wave of relief and terror crash over me all at once. Relief that my voice had been heard, terror because the consequences were still unknown. But one thing was clear, there was no going back. The truth was out, and it was no longer mine alone to carry. As we left the room, Melissa placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood your ground. That was the hardest part." Her words sank into me slowly, like warmth spreading through ice. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't fought for nothing. The days that followed the hearing felt like walking through a fog. Every morning, I woke up with a tightness in my chest, wondering if today would be the day I'd get the call from HR with their decision. At work, the air was thick with whispers. People who once avoided my eyes now glanced at me with cautious curiosity, like they knew something was happening but weren't sure which side of the story to believe. I kept my head down, doing my job as best I could, but beneath the surface, my mind churned constantly. What if HR decided to side with Samantha? What if everything I had laid bare was dismissed as family drama? The thought of losing my job after all of this weighed heavily on me. But I reminded myself of what Melissa had said after the hearing. The hardest part was over. Now the truth had to do the rest. On the fourth day, I got the email. HR decision meeting, 2 p.m. today. My hands shook as I read the subject line, and I could barely concentrate for the next few hours. When I finally walked into the same conference room, Melissa by my side, the atmosphere felt markedly different. The HR representative's expression wasn't cold or skeptical this time. It was grave, serious, but also calm. Samantha sat across the table again, her shoulders hunched, her face pale and tense. She no longer radiated confidence or arrogance. Instead, she looked like someone bracing for impact. The HR representative cleared her throat and began. After reviewing all submitted evidence, including screenshots, emails, voicemails, and corroborating witness statements, we have determined that Samantha violated multiple workplace conduct policies, including harassment, retaliation, and creating a hostile work environment.
While we recognize the complexity of family relationships, the conduct documented in this case extends beyond personal matters and directly affected the professional environment. She paused, looking at Samantha, then at me. As a result, Samantha's employment will be terminated effective immediately. For a moment, the words didn't quite sink in. Terminated. The sound echoed in my head, as though it was bouncing off every wall of the room. Samantha's face crumpled, her lips trembling as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She stared down at the table, her hands clutching the edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Melissa sat perfectly still beside me, her expression unreadable, though I could sense the satisfaction radiating from her calm demeanor. The HR representative continued, "Claire, we also want to formally acknowledge the courage it took for you to bring this matter to our attention. It's not easy to speak out against harassment, especially when complicated by family ties. We are committed to ensuring that you have a safe and supportive environment here moving forward. Resources for counseling and employee support are available should you choose to use them, and we encourage you to take advantage of them." My eyes burned with tears, but I blinked them back. It wasn't about gloating or celebrating Samantha's downfall. It was about finally being validated. Finally, after weeks of gaslighting, denial, and fear, someone in authority had looked me in the eye and said, "You were right, you were wronged, and it matters." Samantha pushed back her chair abruptly, the screech of metal against tile making everyone flinch. She stood, her face streaked with tears she was trying to hold back. "This isn't fair," she whispered hoarsely. "You ruined everything, Claire. You've always wanted to see me fall." Her voice cracked on the last word, and then she turned and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her, the sound final, like a chapter closing. Melissa placed a hand lightly on my arm. "You don't need to listen to that anymore," she murmured. "She made her choices. This is the consequence."
After the meeting, word spread quickly through the office. Some people approached me quietly, offering kind words or supportive smiles. One coworker slipped me a note that said, "I'm glad you spoke up. You're stronger than you think." For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the office outsider or the family scapegoat. I felt seen. That evening, I went home and sat on my couch in silence. The apartment felt different, as though the walls themselves were exhaling with me. The weight I had carried for so long was finally lifting, piece by piece. It wasn't gone entirely. The scars of what had happened still ached, but the suffocating pressure of constant fear and doubt had broken. I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, and scrolled through the old messages one last time. The insults, the mocking, the cruel jokes, they no longer held power over me. They were relics of a chapter that had closed. With a deep breath, I muted the chat permanently and set the phone down. The next morning, when I walked into the office, something had shifted. People looked at me differently, not with pity but with respect. Melissa met me by the coffee machine and offered a small smile. "How do you feel?" she asked. I paused, searching for the right words. "Lighter," I said finally, "like I can breathe again." She nodded. "That's the beginning of the new equilibrium. It doesn't mean the past disappears, but now you get to decide how you move forward." Her words stayed with me as the day unfolded. For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or waiting for the next cruel message to drop. The truth had done its work. Justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was free to start living without fear. The weeks after Samantha's termination unfolded in slow waves of adjustment. At first, I expected to feel only relief, but what came was something more layered. Relief, yes, but also an aching sadness for what had been lost. My family ties, my sense of belonging, the years of history with Samantha that had unraveled into something toxic beyond repair. It was like mourning a relationship that had been poisoned long before I realized it. Still, underneath the grief was something undeniable: freedom. A quiet, steady freedom that hummed beneath my skin every morning I walked into work without dread. I began to notice things I hadn't before, simple details I had overlooked while I was consumed by fear. The office windows caught the sunlight in the early hours, spilling golden light across my desk. Coworkers lingered a little longer in the break room to chat with me. Even Melissa, who had been the steady rock during the storm, seemed more relaxed around me now, laughing more often, letting the heaviness of the past weeks fade into memory. People no longer saw me as the woman with the family drama, but as Claire, the colleague who had stood up for herself when it mattered most. That shift in perception healed something in me that I didn't even know had been bleeding. Outside of work, I began to rebuild my personal life with careful, intentional steps. I started therapy, not just to untangle the trauma of Samantha's betrayal, but to understand the deeper patterns of why I had tolerated her cruelty for so long. My therapist helped me see how years of being the family's scapegoat had conditioned me to doubt my own perceptions, to always swallow the truth to keep the peace. But the act of speaking out, of choosing to expose the hidden toxicity, had cracked that conditioning wide open. I was no longer the person who silently endured. I had transformed into someone who could stand tall in the face of opposition. One Saturday morning, I found myself in a small coffee shop downtown, a notebook open in front of me. I hadn't planned it, but my hand began to write, pouring out everything I had gone through. The group chat messages, the hearing, the tears, the victory. It wasn't for anyone else, not at first, just for me, a way to make sense of it all. But as I filled page after page, a new thought began to flicker in my mind. What if my story could help someone else? What if there was another person sitting alone with their phone in hand, drowning in cruel messages from family, convinced they were powerless? Maybe hearing my journey could give them the courage to take their own step forward. That idea planted itself firmly in my heart. I didn't need to be a hero in anyone's eyes, but if my words could keep even one person from suffering in silence, then everything I had endured would have meaning. Over the next few weeks, I polished my writing, transforming journal entries into essays. With trembling hands, I submitted one to a blog that focused on workplace and family dynamics. I expected silence, maybe a polite rejection. Instead, they accepted it and published it with the headline, "When Family Turns Toxic at Work, One Woman's Fight for Truth."
The response shocked me. Emails poured in from strangers across the country, teachers, nurses, office workers, even a retired man who said my story mirrored what he had endured decades ago but had never spoken about. They thanked me for my courage, for putting into words what they had been too afraid to say. Reading their messages, I realized my experience wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was part of a larger pattern that so many suffered quietly. And now, through my story, we were connected. At work, HR invited me to speak in a training session about workplace harassment and the complications of personal relationships blending into professional settings. Standing at the front of the room, I was nervous, but when I looked out at the attentive faces, I found my voice. I told my story, not in gory detail, but in the way that highlighted the power of truth, the importance of documentation, and the necessity of support systems. By the end, several employees approached me to say thank you. One woman whispered, "I've been going through something similar. Hearing you made me realize I'm not alone." That moment crystallized everything for me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living with purpose. The pain I had endured was no longer just a wound. It was a tool, a light I could use to guide others out of the darkness. And in that realization, I found peace. One evening, months later, I sat on my balcony as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky was streaked with hues of orange and purple, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of summer through the air. I thought about Samantha, not with anger, but with a distant kind of sorrow. She had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. I couldn't change her, and I no longer needed to. What I could change was myself, and I had. As the first stars began to twinkle above, I closed my eyes and took a deep, steady breath. My story had begun with a family group chat exploding with cruel words meant to break me. But it ended here, with me whole, empowered, and ready to help others find their own strength.
I had walked through fire, and on the other side, I wasn't just burned, I was transformed. In the quiet of that evening, I realized something profound. Truth had not only set me free, it had given me a new life. And with that gift, I knew I would never again be silent when it mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.